All right, here's your drink, Freddy Martin. I think it's got some sort of crackling foam on top, so be careful.
Oh, thanks so much, Alex Stewart. Your beverage also looks mighty tasty. Is that a Melurun rum runner?
Ooh, you studied the menu, you little devil. Well done. So now we just wait for this guy to supposedly meet us here?
I guess so.
Wow, this cantina's amazing. I can't believe how much this looks like the one back at Disneyland.
Al, I'm starting to think what you were talking about is right.
What, the Womp Rat stew really isn't as bad as they say it is?
No, not that. I'm talking about your theory about how Imagineers have been sneaking off to this real Batuu to get inspiration for the one back in the park.
Right? The signs are everywhere. I mean, again, look at where we're at right now in this cantina. It looks exactly like the one in Galaxy's Edge, inch for inch.
It is compelling, but at the moment, we don't have that smoking gun evidence to really prove anything at this point.
And we may never. What we do have, though, is some tasty little drinkies here, some ample time, and a transmitting device.
Oh, great idea, Al. We don't want to leave our listeners at the backside of water hanging, even though we're stuck on this planet deep in the wild space of the Star Wars universe.
You're right, they shouldn't miss out on us exploring the rich history, awesome stories, and fascinating details behind their favorite Disney attractions just because our Star Tours shuttle was hijacked and brought here without our knowledge. So with that, fire up that transmitter.
Okay, going live in 5, 4, 3, 2... Hello and welcome to another episode of The Backside of Water, a podcast that delves into the rich history, awesome stories, and fascinating details behind your favorite Disney attractions. I'm Freddy Martin.
And I'm Alex Stewart. And on our last episode, we intercepted a transmission from former Imagineer Kevin Blakeney, where all three of us talked about his involvement in the creation of Galaxy's Edge as a whole, as well as the Project Stardust. And on this episode, we're going to be covering... Freddy, what will we be covering on this episode?
Well, about that, we didn't really talk about that before we hit record, did we? Here, look, I've got an idea. Since we're coming live from this cantina, why don't we talk about the rich and very unexpected history of Oga's Cantina in Galaxy's Edge?
Ah, brilliant! That's why you're here, Freddy.
And now, with our heading in place, let's set sail.
So, the Cantina. Now, what I love about cantinas, Freddy, is that, first of all, a cantina is not a place that most people just kind of go to as their local watering hole. The word cantina kind of makes it feel exotic in and of itself. And these exotic dining establishments are actually woven throughout a lot of Star Wars lore. I mean, one of the most famous being the Mos Eisley Cantina, if we remember that from the original Star Wars film.
Yeah, that was where the kids of the 70s fell in love with these bizarro characters, and we, as soon as the action figures came out, we started playing with them and knowing their names, and they were all residents or weirdos from this cantina.
And they had so many of them to choose from when they were shooting those original scenes, which was awesome. I mean, it was the perfect wretched hive of scum and villainy that every one of us as kids wanted to be in company with. And so naturally, Galaxy's Edge needed to offer these kind of signature establishments in the park, not only for keeping to the themes of the film, but also for a practical purpose. They needed to feed and water the guests. Now, again, we talk about a lot on this show the concepting of a land and a park, and this is one of those big areas where, I mean, being in the themed industry, Freddy, the ability to feed and water guests is almost as important as the attractions that you offer, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have to have so many pieces together in order for it to be a successful land. If you think back to the beginning of Disneyland, the horror stories of Black Sunday or whatever they called it on July 17th, 1955, is that there wasn't enough water fountains, and people started complaining, thinking that was in order to sell more Coca-Cola. and people need, and not enough bathrooms. So you have to think about all the needs of the guests so that they forget about those things. You know, that they make their dining and their drinking part of the experience, but that's not why they're there. But if it wasn't there, neither would they be.
And I think you bring up a great point. That's something that we actually talked about on the last major episode that we recorded. If you think about it, it was one of those where we were saying that the best designs are the ones that you take for granted. And food and beverage is absolutely one of these. And again, Imagineers weren't ever going to take this for granted. And as we looked into this, as we explored into this, they were going to be going all out. And the first place that they were going to be providing food and beverage for people was something called the Kalikori Club. Now, this Kalikori Club was awesome. So let me set it up
So
as far as
this was a restaurant they were going to put in there apart from the Oga's Cantina, or it was the original idea before Oga's Cantina
great
became
question. So it was
onto the
actually
drawing
going,
board?
yeah, it was going to be its own establishment. It was going to be an actual table service restaurant in Galaxy's Edge, which at the recording of this transmission, we still do not have any table service. Now, when we say table service, Freddie, can you explain the difference between like quick service and table service for those who
Yeah,
may not know?
yeah. There's several different types of restaurant styles that are inside of a theme park, and you have table service, and that is what it sounds like. It means somebody comes to your table, you place an order, and like a restaurant back on Earth, you would have a server come to you, and they would take your order and then bring you your food. Table service. Then there's quick service, which is more like there's tables, there's sit down area. It's usually interior, but there's a counter that you walk up to and you purchase and order your food from there. I like to think of it as the difference between the Blue Bayou restaurant in New Orleans Square or the Harper's Galley restaurant where you
Hmm.
just walk up and grab food. And then counter service is similar to that as well. You know, counter service is just a kiosk with food, and you can walk up and get it, and you go find a place around the park to eat. So those are the varieties of different ways, and Galaxy's Edge only has uh, quick service.
Yes. In Docking Bay 7, and then you also have it over with Ronto Roasters. And one of the things that, I mean, Freddie, what is one of the reasons why, or a couple of the reasons why a park would opt for table service? To me, or maybe to an average listener, it may seem like table service is kind of a waste of a guest's time if their goal is to get on attractions. So why would a park offer that as an option?
Well, it really depends on the time that people have thought through on their trip, what they want to do when they come to Disneyland. They want to go on. If a person is all about the rides, they have to hit all the mountains. They have to hit all the dark rides. That is their day, and it's planned out. They don't want to spend time waiting on a meal to come and
Hmm.
be served at their table. But some people have a different plan. They're on vacation. They want to relax. They want somebody to serve them and clean the dishes and take things away. And they want to sort of elevate that experience by having a table service meal. That's also economies of scale. You know, you can get through more people in an hour at a quick service than you can at a table service restaurant. But that is a good reason to charge more money. So there's fewer people in a table service restaurant than there are uh, at served at a quick service restaurant. So
Well, and
it's really about what people want. Some people want to spend the money to have a nice meal served to their table. Other people, they just got to feed them and their younglings quickly, and they do that by getting the fish and chips or the chicken tenders and the hot dog and moving on.
and I think it's really interesting too because there's also not only does it elevate the opportunity for food and beverage consumption, There's also somewhat of a practical approach, I would imagine, too, that it's making the park less congested by having those people sitting inside of the restaurant instead of gumming up queues. And with
Yeah.
that, you have less waits in lines, but you're still providing people with attractions. And the big thing with this, though, is in a Disney table service restaurant, you don't ever have a boring or run of the mill experience. You brought it up earlier, Freddie, when we covered the Blue Bayou. You have this rich, immersive experience that you're truly, there's a reason for you to sit inside of the Blue Bayou, to take time away from those rides, because the Blue Bayou experience is worth that sacrifice. And again, Imagineers take all of this into account when they are building these experiences. And the Calicori Club, let me tell you, would deliver when it came to the immersive excitement. So again, let me now set the stage for you here, because what we're seeing with the Calicori Club is it's set back in kind of a seedy back alley of Merchant Row, is what they kind of call the area of Galaxy's Edge. And with that area, you have an abandoned bathhouse. And this abandoned bathhouse is where a crime lord comes in and takes over, converts this bathhouse into what we would know on Earth as a speakeasy. So she creates a speakeasy inside of this bathhouse. So the decor looks like a converted bathhouse. There's performers all over the place. There's a lot of focus on music and actual live vocal performance. And it was all hinged on this character who was running the whole place by the name of Gaia. Now, for those of you who are diehard, dorktastic Star Wars fans like myself, the name Gaia goes off in your brain that you're like, oh my gosh, because y'all, I really didn't talk about it on this show. I don't think we've ever addressed on the backside of Water Freddy that myself and a friend of mine by the name of Michael, we went to the Galactic Star Cruiser, which was the Star Wars themed hotel down in Orlando.
I'm so jealous.
I can honestly tell you and every listener out there that there is no doubt in my mind that it is the greatest Disney experience I've ever had on the planet Earth. And I don't know if it will ever get better. Because on those 2.5 days that you are on the Galactic Star Cruiser, you assume a character, you become a character, and they have characters walking around, and it's basically live theater for 2.5 days. And one of the characters on the Galactic Star Cruiser, who is a Twi'lek, which is what this character, the Calicori, is basically a family heirloom of the Twi'lek species in Star Wars. This Twi'lek is walking around, and she's actually the famous performer who is showing up on the Halcyon Galactic Star Cruiser for one night only. And what's her name? Gaia. So they tied in this character, they resurrected this character from the now defunct idea of the Calicori Club, but reused her in the Galactic Star Cruiser. And we'll talk about Gaia when we go a little bit further down the rabbit hole in just a little bit.
That's so amazing.
And that's, here's the thing is, Freddie, I don't want people to think that I'm just nerding out about Star Wars because I am such a massive Star Wars fan.
But you are.
Well, touche. What I want people to really take away from this is Galaxy's Edge is the most well thought out and most immersive land that Disney has ever tackled, at least in the United States. And the fact that they are taking in multiple experiences and creating storylines for characters that exist throughout this entire story experience to make guests feel like they're part of this program even more is what's so absolutely fantastic about how Imagineering has approached Galaxy's Edge.
So this would have been a table service restaurant that you go into, a little bit high end, but seedy. It's
Yes.
all almost like going into gangland and going to a nightclub in the gangland area to watch a show and have a dinner.
Exactly. You go down into an alleyway, you do like your secret knock, and then you have a password that you say, and then they let you in as the bouncer's big and hulking to get you in. Yep,
Uh,
that's exactly it.
it's I imagine that it's a good thing that they probably used an English word for the password if they had ever built it, rather than Kashyyyk.
Yeah, that is. If everybody had to remember that, now remember there's 3 warbles, 1 gargle, and 2 honks. If you don't do it, your arms are going to be ripped off.
Yeah. Yep.
So to me, the Kalikori Club is one of those where it's almost like the Tahitian Terrace that never was. At least Tahitian Terrace had a chance. At least Tahitian Terrace people enjoyed, whereas the Kalikori Club was this fantastic dining experience that nobody ever got a chance to experience, which
Yeah,
makes me
right.
so sad.
Well, it's the would have been, could have been, should have been is always the sad part of any uh, addition to Disneyland. You always, well, they could have done this, and then you say, oh man, but they did give you something
Yeah,
in
yeah.
replacement.
Well, and the thing that's amazing is we also see another scrapped table service restaurant for Galaxy's Edge that there's not a lot known about this place. It was called the Spice Den. So in Star Wars lore, let's be honest, spice is an illegal substance that people take in Star Wars world universe in order to feel happy or to feel mellow or to feel something. I don't know exactly what spice users feel.
See possible futures all at once.
This isn't a spice dream.
But Freddy, listen to this place. What I could find about this place sounds amazing. You would be sitting inside of the Spice Den, and you would be surrounded by 2-story tall aquariums that weren't filled with earth fish. They were filled with animatronic alien creatures that would surround you while you were eating in the Spice Den.
That sounds so cool. I've been to the Living with the Sea uh, pavilion at Epcot, and they have a restaurant there, and one giant wall is one big aquarium, but with earth fish. I can't imagine if it was filled with, those creatures in episode 1 that chomp each other one by one.
There's always
The
a
bigger
bigger
one,
fish.
there's always a bigger fish.
Well, the thing that always kind of haunts us as Disney fans is why did these things get scrapped? And I mean, honestly, there's no real there's speculation as to why these got scrapped, but we don't want to get into like weird corporate politics of why Disney does what they do on this show. What we just know is that sadly it got scrapped. But they did keep this idea that they needed some sort of cantina, right? I
Right.
mean, there needed to be some sort of watering hole. And there's a huge amount of pressure on the Walt Disney Company because the popularity of cantinas within Star Wars lore. And let's be honest, as Star Wars fans, we know how loyal the fans can be, and we also know how they can be like piranhas and tear something apart if they don't like it.
Yeah,
And
if it's not just quite right.
well, and that's where they basically started, was from a place of sanctity, saying that this is something that we need to uphold, something that we need to make sure that we're doing justice on. And one of the big things that we see is character driven experiences are huge in Galaxy's Edge. So they knew that they needed a character to drive this new cantina. And so, because of that, they had to create a really powerful owner of this place. Now, again, the scrapped Gaia owner storyline was maintained, but it went into the Galactic Star Cruiser experience. But that runner of the underworld level there, or that element, they kept that in this new character that they created by the name of Oga Gera. Now, she was going to be the one who would run the cantina and underworld in Batuu. Now, again, I want everybody to remember we're peppering these characters into this story as we go, but I'm not making this up, and it's not just something that's in like an Imagineer's Bible or something like that to build the land. There is a book out there that has the entire story of Galaxy's Edge unfolding inside of that book. Even if you're not a huge Star Wars fan, if you're a Disney fan, I highly recommend that you read it. I believe that it's called the Black Spire.
Right.
Either that or the Black Spire Outpost. It's one of those. I really love this book, yet I don't know the title of it. Shame on me. But
Well,
but what you see is that Disney as a whole took this concerted effort to create the world inside of this book. So you can read the book and you can learn about who Oga Gera was and how she served as kind of this anti hero antagonist as the story unfolds, not only for the characters in the book, but for you as a character in the experience.
so are you saying that when in this book, Black Spire
Uh-huh.
by Delilah Dawson,
Yes, our good friend.
that yes, when we read that book, we're gonna learn about the heroes and we're gonna learn about the villains in the story, and one of the villains is Ogagara,
Mhm.
and so therefore, if you go into Oga's Cantina, you're supporting a crime network.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Freddie. It is true though that and I think you bring up a really good point though too in that do we need to know who Ogagera is in order to enjoy our experience there?
No, no, no.
No, it's not required. Does it give you a deeper appreciation for story building and placemaking if you do read that book?
It sure does. And when you stand outside of Oga's Cantina and you see all the blaster marks in the wall, it helps you to understand why there might have been some sort of street battle, street shootout right outside of Oga's Cantina.
And so it sets that tone even more. And when we go inside, we'll actually talk about blaster marks inside of Oga's Cantina as well.
What?
They've thought of everything. So,
Who drew first?
oh, that's a good question. We need to have an entire podcast episode. Our next live episode needs to be two Star Wars fans duking it out on who shot first, Han or Greedo. So, one of the things that I really want to focus on here is the fact that this character is edgy, right? This Oga Gera is kind of a seedy character, and so they needed something to kind of create an edginess with this character. And obviously, a character like Oga Gera is not going to be selling apple juice and smoothies, right? We have to have something edgy. And Freddie, this is where some edge in the history of Disney parks comes in because they want to include alcohol in this. Now, Freddie, give us a quick breakdown. Why is it such a big deal that alcohol is going to potentially be served in a Disney park at Oga's Cantina?
Well, it's not a secret that other Disney parks had alcohol right across the way at California Adventure. They had restaurants that served wine and beer and some cocktails, and but that was also hard fought and won by Disney company along the way. Competing theme parks all around the country, including especially Busch Gardens, which had theme parks all over the country in Canada. Busch Gardens is owned by the Anheuser-Busch Company, which is Budweiser. And you would go to those theme parks and drink a Budweiser. In fact, they would give Budweiser away for free in the old days at Busch Gardens.
Amazing.
And that would often, sometimes lead to unruly behavior by guests.
Yeah.
And of course, the sort of conservative nature of America in the 1950s and splitting up in the 1960s, the parents didn't want a lot of parents didn't want their kids around people drinking alcohol. And so that was very much part of the Disney experience, is that it's a wholesome experience, and that the introduction of alcohol would take away that wholesome edge that Disney had. Well, cultures change. Cultures go through shifts, and grown-ups started to want to have alcohol with their meals, and it didn't necessarily mean that they were addicted or anything. They were just
They weren't
enjoying.
ne'er-do-wells.
Right. They were just enjoying a beverage. And so we started to see the culture change where it wasn't looked upon as the dark side. People in those days, in order to go and buy a cocktail, you had to go into a bar
Mm-hmm.
that was all lit up by uh,
Neon
neon beer
signs.
signs, and had cigarette machines and
Smelled like smoke.
posters of not necessarily the most family friendly look. And so that's what people had in the back of their heads as to what, if you were to bring a bar into Disney, it seems like it doesn't go together, And so the there was pressure on Disney not to include that. Now, certainly, if you go to a restaurant today, one of the first questions that a server asks you is, "What can I get you to drink?" Now, they're not necessarily thinking iced tea and Coca-Cola,
Mm-hmm.
and nowadays they charge more for iced tea and Coca-Cola, but they can charge a whole lot more for something with a little bit of alcohol in it. And
Yeah.
so it's always an upsell. And so I'm certain that in board meetings and things, boy, it would sure be nice if we could sell alcohol along this. It would be an additional fee or an additional charge that we could make money on in the parks. And some of the more the more the some of the people who were more traditional to what Disney was
Mm-hmm.
doing back in the old days would say that takes away. That's not what Walt would want. Walt didn't want alcohol in this park, so therefore we shouldn't have alcohol in this park. It's no secret that Walt enjoyed his own alcoholic beverage from time to time, or nightly, who knows. But it was oh gosh, what's it called? What's his favorite drink? The
I don't know what his
fizz.
favorite drink
It's
was,
no,
actually.
it's a
Manhattan.
mist.
Old-fashioned.
It is a something mist.
Ooh.
Don't keep this in.
No, I'm going to keep this in, Freddy.
No, it's
We're
a
recording live.
Scotch mist. A Scotch mist.
Scotch mist? That sounds horrible.
No, it's not. What's interesting about a Scotch mist? Sorry, I'm going to go into Walt's alcohol consumption. A
I
Scotch
love
mist.
it. I'm here for it.
A Scotch mist is a very, very simple cocktail. It is Scotch and then a lot of soda water. So it's
so it's just
Scotch,
watered down Scotch?
Watered down Scotch. And
That
I've
sounds
had
awful.
it. They serve it in California Adventure at the 1901 or at the
Club 1901?
yeah, Club 1901, but the one next door, the
Ooh, I
gosh,
don't
what's
know.
it called? No, the restaurant that's inside
The Carthay Circle?
Carthay Circle.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah.
So in Carthay Circle, they serve the Scotch mist, but it's unremarkable. It's not delicious. It's not great, but it's Walt's drink. So they have it on the menu and people can buy it. But
I love
it's
that.
not.
I learned something new today, Freddie.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
it's not a hard drink. To some, if you have several, it's a hard drink.
Yeah, that's
But-
true. But it's actually just watered down alcohol, which is
Yeah,
hilarious.
and I
that
think
it's-
he had a twist of lemon in it too, so that wasn't much.
Well,
but
and
anyway,
I think one of the big things with this too is to keep in mind that Walt Disney saw what was going on, like you said, with all these other parks. When you look at places like Coney Island, they seemed like they were a little low class because they were selling alcohol. And I think that somebody could look at it with a more conservative mind and say, well, it's because of the alcohol consumption at these places that we're seeing some of the degradation of this.
Right,
And
and-
that's where Walt was coming from in a lot of ways.
yeah, in a place like Coney Island, all the sailors are coming into town and they're ready to party, and so they didn't stop at one. And-
Exactly. And they would say, I'll take a Scotch mist, hold the mist.
Yeah, right. And so to enjoy a Disney park, in days gone by, it meant you didn't have to enhance it with
Yeah.
alcohol.
Well, and I
Um,
think one thing that's really interesting about that too is the fact that, like you said, Freddie, I think that you very aptly put it that sentiments change, that perceptions around things like alcohol change. But do you remember when they announced this at 2019 that there was going to be alcohol sold in Galaxy's Edge? People kind of lost their minds, didn't they?
yeah, they lost their heads, and I can see both sides.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
like it's like you want the purity of a storybook. When you sit
Hmm.
down with your kid at night and you're going to read them a story to go to bed, you don't also want Snow White to drink a White Russian before she goes to bed in that book. And so now
It helps me sleep better.
yeah, and and then everybody's dopey.
Oh.
The plan to have your kids seeing people, some people don't want their kids seeing people
Hmm.
drink alcohol, and that is and our culture does that as well. You're not supposed to walk around the streets drinking alcohol. Save that for Vegas.
Hmm.
If you're going, typically the tavern portion of a restaurant is set off to the side because they are being sensitive to what families are trying to instill in their kids, and prevent them from overuse or harm. So
For
it's
sure.
a reasonable thought.
Well, and I think one of the things that we see is, like you said, there was this big push and pull that was constantly happening, and the executive team was looking at this, and they put out, as we all know, they put out a ton of surveys and questionnaires to try to get kind of a read on this. And one of the things that they said is, believe it or not, the lack of alcohol was preventing a larger audience from visiting Disneyland. And so they put that into the consideration when it came to building an entirely new land. And they said, you know what, like it or not, if we want more people to come here and we want not just the local scene that's just annual pass holders, we need to introduce alcohol. And so they did. And they did it unapologetically. And so with that, what we see is we see that since this move occurred, they had to package it in a way where it was going to be it was going to try to please all parties. Like Freddie said, it was going to be kind of walled off. It was going to be its own little walled garden, but inside of there, it also couldn't. They had to play this weird fine line. It had to be scummy. It had to be villainous because it was from Star Wars. But there's no way that it could ever encourage somebody to go in there and just get absolutely slammed and hammered and stumble out into the streets of Batuu and make a scene in front of everybody. So, I mean, think about what kind of task that had to be for Imagineers.
Yeah, they had to think through what kind of drinks they would serve and how many you were able to purchase at one time, and that plays out in the reservation system and how many you're allowed to order and
And you're
all of
pushed out of
that.
there fast.
Yeah.
Like they
That
roll you out quick.
Yeah, that's not the case over at the hotel at Disneyland Hotel where you have
Mhm.
Trader Sam's. You can stay there and enjoy drinks all day, but the sense is that you're not going to wander out and you might stumble back to your hotel room, but you're not going to wander out and stumble into Fantasyland and cause a
Make a
scene
scene.
there.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I think that with this introduction of alcohol, they have to set the stage perfectly. And in order to do that, they turned to an absolute master of placemaking by the name of Ralph McQuarrie. Now, Ralph McQuarrie, I want to do just a quick spotlight on this dude. For people who don't know who Ralph McQuarrie is, he basically created all of the concepts for characters, locations, ship designs, basically everything you physically see in a Star Wars film was concepted and created by Ralph McQuarrie, and then George Lucas looked at it and said, "Okay, I like that. Let's move forward with it." So things like C-3PO's design, Stormtroopers design, a lot of the Imperial ships, everything that you see as far as locations go, it all started with McQuarrie. And here's the crazy thing: is Ralph McQuarrie obviously at one point stopped drawing. but they still to this day will use Ralph McQuarrie's unused concepts in all of the Star Wars entities because it is such a guiding light. And as per usual, that's exactly what Imagineers did here. They took that inspiration, and I should say they took some of those concept drawings that were never used, and they used them to create Oga's. The specific one that they focused on was an interior scene that he drew from an early sketch of Jabba the Hutt's palace in the Return of the Jedi film. And I don't know if you've ever seen this sketch, Freddy, but it's just a very sparse desert style stucco palace with just some arched porticos for seating inside. And it's very, very basic drawing, like very basic. And that's what they take and they run with it. But when you look at it, you can see all of the inspiration for Oga's in just that tiny drawing.
I love that. I think it's great that the original drawings inspire something more for later on. There's a lot that goes on to the drawing room floor when you're creating a movie or you're creating some sort of intellectual property. Some things that you can't use, some things that get cut in the film that we never see until we get the extended version of the film, and so it's exciting to see those things picked up, pulled out of the archives, and used again in a really special way. I mean, you see that in a lot of different things with Haunted Mansion. There's a lot that's not being used that had been drawn, multiple different artists on Haunted Mansion, but today they're at Disneyland. They're getting ready to open a new shop at the end of the ride, exit through a gift shop.
Uh-huh.
And that will certainly, and some of the concepts that you've seen, certainly fills in with some of those great drawings from both Mark Davis and hit me with his name,
Rolly Crump.
Rolly Crump.
Yes. Well, and
And with Rolly Crump.
you'll also see on top of that, I mean, think about the Museum of the Weird that never
Yeah,
got
exactly.
created, and now we're seeing that brought to new life. I mean, again, as we see in this show over and over, everything is usable. All content is usable, and that's what I appreciate about this approach. So Lucasfilm, obviously, and the Walt Disney Company merged back in 2015, but they were very aligned in their respect and appreciation for heritage. And so again, those two merged for the creation of this land, and they said, "Hey, let's keep this back with the OG creators," and that's why they chose to kind of spark the designs from that original Ralph McQuarrie drawing. Now, the thing that's cool about this is what I love, is obviously with a project like this, you don't go off of one single concept drawing from one single artist. Instead, you have this massive team of insanely creative and talented artists who come together and say, let's find what this looks like in our mind, put it on paper, and then let that spark people's imaginations even further to create this place. So what I love is digging through some of these old drawings that you see of concepts from Oga's Cantina, and some of them are absolutely bonkers, like out of this world. Originally, Oga's Cantina was supposed to be tended by, when I say tended, I mean the bartenders were going to be aliens, which is
Yeah, that's great.
insane. So Doug Chang, who, again, if I drop that name to Star Wars fans who are really deep nerds, you know who Doug Chang is. Doug Chang is the creative director for Lucasfilm, and he's kind of like the keeper of the keys. If anybody has a question of, is this Star Wars or is it not, Doug Chang has such a massive understanding of the universe that he knows every single wrench that was used to create the Star Speeder in Episode 4 of the Droids cartoon. It's
Right.
amazing what this guy is capable of remembering. But he took that on and said, basically, I'm going to take Star Wars and help create this world. And at first, they all loved the idea of this alien tending bar, but Doug Chang was like, Well, how are we going to do that? If it's a cast member in a costume, imagine how much preparation that's going to take just to get to your shift. And then when you get off your shift, you got to change out of it again. So what do they tend to move to, Freddie, in a
Oh,
situation like this?
I would guess like the next up is, should we do this with animatronics? That would be really cool.
Exactly. And so again, it seems like a cool idea, but a couple of big issues with this. First is how can you make an animatronic interact with a guest on a level that's like that of a bartender, of when you walk
Yeah.
into Cheers and they say, "Ah, Norm, ah, Freddie, Al." That an animatronic can't do that. The other thing that I think about from a practical standpoint is what is the OSHA risk of putting animatronics around a bunch of liquid? That seems terrifying to me.
Yeah, zap zap. It's the end of your shift because there's smoke coming out of your hair at the moment.
Either that or it's the end of your shift because, yeah, you're going out on a body pack.
Oh,
And-
ouch! That is the dark side of Disney.
But if you think about it, this is what Chang and the team were looking at. That they were saying nuts and bolts. How do we keep people safe yet still provide this awesome experience? And one of the things that they did is they said, okay, since we can't do animatronics as like those interactions with our guests, let's put it behind the scenes. So some of the early sketches you see that there's like a crime boss overlord before they'd fully endorsed or embraced this Oga Gera. They have this like ethereal crime boss sitting over watching the goings on as everybody's working throughout. They decided that wasn't the route. Other things, this one I think is cool. They had this concept that Oga was actually this giant tentacled beast that was sitting on top of the cantina, and Oga was so big that its tentacles that its whole body couldn't get into the cantina, so they cut holes into the ceiling and just had Oga's tentacles coming down and making drinks in the middle of the bar as everybody's
my
sitting
goodness.
there. Which
The
would
Kraken.
That's exactly
Yeah.
it. That's exactly it. So again, there were other concepts that were thrown around that basically Oga was this aquatic creature that was floating in this giant tank behind the bar and overseeing everything. So it would have been this aquatic animatronic watching over things. There were a ton of insanely awesome ideas. And did any of them get greenlit?
I would guess no. Gosh, I would have loved to have, part of the Star Wars universe is the hologram communications. And imagine if your bartender zapped in and out at your table or at the bar to take your order. That would have been cool.
That would have been very cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Even
Get
just to
me-
have something
get-
you put on the table.
Right. Get me a Scotch Mist. You're my only hope.
I wish that's what the Scotch Mist was called in Ogas, was just my only hope. So with this, I mean, obviously they didn't accept any of these because, I mean, practicality, the overabundance of cost on any one of the executions for those ideas was just immense. And so again, this is something that we always see on this show, that they took into account how big can this be, and they said all of that was too big. But they did keep some of those ideas, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, one thing that I think is really cool, though, with this is they even kept the alcohol themed. You would have
Yeah.
all these different themed names for alcohol. Freddie, you've had a few drinks in Ogas, right?
Yes, I have.
Do you have a favorite by chance?
Well, I really did love that fizzy one, the one I'm having right now.
The Fuzzy
but I can't
Tauntaun?
remember. The Fuzzy Tauntaun. I knew it was something like that.
Yes.
And it's such a unique experience. It really does taste and feel like something from another planet when you're enjoying it. It is really something special.
And the fact that they do things like all these different crazy flavored foams, exploding candies, and the numbing properties of the Fuzzy Tauntaun. When you drink this thing, it makes your mouth just a little bit numb,
Yeah,
which is
it's like-
crazy.
Yeah, it's like going to the dentist in space.
And the nice thing is, after a Fuzzy Tauntaun, you can go in and get a root canal, and you don't need anything else other than a Tauntaun.
Okay, I'm not going for that.
I'll take a Tauntaun, Doc. Just keep them coming. I mean, one thing that I also appreciate, and this is something I've never collected, but Freddie, they've got a lot of different mug offerings at Oga's Cantina, which I think is kind of cool from a
Yeah, those were
merchandising
neat.
perspective.
Yeah, the whole tiki bar movement, and having custom made drink mugs that people would bring to their favorite tiki bar and have filled up, that translates up into a galaxy far, far away. And there were all kinds of really fun, different mugs shaped like things within the Star Wars universe, like the porgs or the loth cats, which I think
Hmm.
are such a strange creature. You can pet them in the pet shop down the way.
Purrs.
A
Those
real
things are
one, I mean.
awesome. I always wanted that Rancor tooth flight. That
Oh,
it
yeah.
has like its own little stand and you put all the different Rancor teeth in there. That thing was awesome. The thing that I think is hard about these is it feels like they've kind of like half committed to the idea of these mugs. That they're very rarely in stock, first and foremost.
Of course, but that just leads to their rarity, and then people wanting to get there and get the first one, and then they're assured to sell out. The more you have, the less the demand, and so there's that, and there's a strategy to that. That's for sure.
That is true. That is true. And I'd be curious to see if they come out with more designs as time goes on because
I can't
again,
imagine them not.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those that you get to take a little piece of Disney home and again, like they had the strategy at the very end or at the very onset of the creation of Ogas, they said they want people to come back for more. And how do you create the desire to come back for more? Well, you create a collectability level with it,
That's
and
right.
people want to come back and collect.
Yep, they do.
Now, one of the big things before we wrap up this whole conversation is we can't not talk about the music in Oga's Cantina, Freddie.
Oh yes.
I mean, it's iconic, and we have an iconic DJ, right?
Oh yeah, Captain Rex from the cockpit.
That's right. He's been repurposed. We found out where he went. He wasn't to a scrapyard after he got replaced. It was to Oga's Cantina. And he plays all of your favorite hits from around the galaxy. Now, this is the thing that actually fascinated me, Freddie, was the creation of music. As somebody who does a lot of musical projects, I look at this and was fascinated by how do you create a song that is a pop song that is popular throughout another galaxy with a bunch of different alien languages being spoken. That's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, it sure is. I often think about some of you know that my I designed my house to be something like a bit of Disneyland away
Yes.
from Disneyland, and my office is an Adventureland room. So there's music for that. I can set the music in my Adventureland room, or there's music for Frontierland, and it doesn't have to just be Disneyland. It's good old bluegrass music or something like that goes on well in Frontierland. You create a mood. But Tomorrowland has always been a little bit of a tough one because people who were creating they were creating movies, sci-fi movies back in the 50s and 60s and things like that. They were trying to create music that they thought that aliens would like, and it was usually just electronic pops and wheezes and yeah. And you can't really. Sometimes it's not even listenable. And so I think the imaginations of Earth humans on what other people like to listen to on other planets was a bit limited. And although some great stuff is out there, you think about like you were just whistled, the Star Trek sound, it does feel like it's somewhere far outer space. But when you're trying to create something that is within the canon of Star Wars, you got to think about, what if this person on this planet be really into listening to the galactic Taylor Swift,
Yeah.
or and it's almost like you got to picture what the Masked Singer would be like on Tatooine if they if
Yep.
they had that. What
Yes.
songs would they be singing?
And with that, one thing that you look at is so the Imagineering group that put this together, there was a couple of executive producers on this, and basically what they did is they mashed a bunch of world music from either the Middle East or Africa or someplace like China. They would mix those genres together, those world musics, those cultural music together. And then what they would do is to make it otherworldly, they would run it backwards. They would take that
Oh
music,
gosh,
play
that's
it
cool.
backwards, and they were like, this is probably what something not of our earth would sound like. And they took that as inspiration and they took that to a bunch of different creators. And they approached them and said, one, would you be willing to voice something like this? And then when those creators said, yes, I'll do vocals on this, they then had this big problem because if they had somebody who was a famous or notable vocalist on there, you couldn't make that known because obviously that's going to break that magic that somebody's going to hear on there and be like, "Oh, that's Mariah Carey. This is Earth now. I forgot that I'm on Earth." Instead, it had to be shrouded in this belief that these were other worldly vocalists. And so with this, you see this playlist starting to bud and create, and all of these songs are not created by bands that you know. They're created by bands with references, or I should say that their names have references to different things in Star Wars lore. And you've got some similar songs, and you've got some songs that are out there, and you even have one by who? Gaia. Gaia is actually showing up on the soundtrack at
Oh,
Oga's
that's great.
Cantina, which is
That's
awesome
great.
because it ties that whole thing together. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating about this blew my mind, Freddie. Did you know that they actually wrote some of these songs in Huttese and in the language of Ewoks?
That's amazing.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of. I always loved Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien and
Yes.
the way he would write poetry in Elvish and really fully create a language that you can write a song in. And there we go. They're creating the Star Wars songs.
That's
from
exactly
Star Wars
right.
languages.
And they have like the full spoken language. And so they would create these. And again, this was another way to separate these famous vocalists from the craft, is that they would hide them behind a band name, but then they would also have them sing in other languages. And one of the things that I love that the Walt Disney Company did with this is something that they don't ever really do at all, is they released Oga's soundtrack on streaming platforms. So you can listen to all the tracks, well, 18 of the tracks from Oga's Cantina on your favorite streaming platform. And to be honest, they're on my regular mix. I will listen to Oga's soundtrack on a regular basis because there's some really great songs on there.
Are they really that good?
I really think so. I can send you over some that I think are actually genuinely good. A lot of them you have to like world music in order to really appreciate them.
Yeah,
So
I like that.
so if world music is your thing, I think that you will like some of these. So again, overall, Oga's Cantina really is a masterpiece in placemaking with a purpose. Unique from any other attractions in the park, this cantina transports you through the use of all of your senses to immerse you in a world of fantasy that many Star Wars fans could have only dreamed of. The immersive theming and rich storytelling found within the walls of Oga's is further proof of Imagineering's desire to bring you into your own imagination. All they ask is that you let the real world disappear and that you tip your bartender. And that's the story of Oga's Cantina.
I love it, Al. That was great. I'm just so interesting to hear all about the different ways that they had to think through this, something as common as a bar, and make it into a real Star Wars experience.
Yeah, something so very uncommon. I agree. I was fascinated by this. And again, our goal with these episodes, y'all, is we don't necessarily, even if you're a huge Star Wars fan, you'll get something out of this, but we really want to make it so even if you're not a huge Star Wars fan, when you go in and sit in Oga's and you're just having a drink with your friends, you can have conversations about things. And I promised that we'd find out the blaster bolts thing inside, and I didn't deliver. Freddy, the reason why there are blaster bolts inside of Oga's Cantina is because there was a shootout. Because 40 years prior to the story taking place on Batuu, guess who showed up in Oga's Cantina but Darth Vader? Darth Vader
Oh,
in lore showed up 40 years previously, and the bartenders and everybody had this giant shootout inside of there because he was there.
wow. You can smell the Dark Lord from here.
And speaking of the Dark Lord, folks, if you like this episode, please be sure to like what you hear on either Apple Music. Give us a good rating over there if you've got the time. Follow us on Spotify. You can also put comments on Spotify now, so please comment what you think about these episodes. Also, if you can give us a review over on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, we'd absolutely love that. Anything that you're listening, I should say any platform you're listening to this on, please feel free to rate us with. And Freddie, where can people find you and us on the show?
Well, you can check out Backside of Water on Instagram. That's where a lot of really fun stuff happens, and announcements and episodes get teased and all kinds of fun stuff there. You can follow me at Skipper Freddy on Instagram. I'm toying around with TikTok these days. So if you want to see a little bit about what I'm doing with the decoration of my Disneyland house, you're welcome to check that out there. I'm Skipper Freddy there as well.
And you're doing mewing tutorials too, right?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're
I'm
not doing mewing
all.
tutorials
I
on
know.
TikTok?
No, my beard is it does its own thing.
Oh, fair enough. So, sorry, I'm just thinking about you doing TikTok dances right now, and I just can't get it out of my head. So with that, as you exit, please watch your head and watch your step.
And if you happen to miss your step and hit your head, please watch your yum nub.
Ichuta. How rude.
That was quite the production.
Thanks. Who are you?
The name's Foray Alden. May I sit?
Oh, are you our contact the guy from Docking Bay 7 told us about?
Why don't we try to keep that information between the three of us?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm new to this whole sneaking around and spying thing.
Yeah, it's a little stressful, to be honest.
If you're feeling stressed, imagine how the peaceful people of Batuu feel being under the oppressive power of the First Order.
Yeah, I guess that puts it into perspective, but with all due respect, we don't want to get into the middle of any of these skirmishes amongst the locals.
He's right. We just want to get back home, which is a planet far, far away from here.
Unfortunately, nothing on Batuu comes for free, especially passage off this planet.
I figured as much, so what's the price? I mean, we got plenty of credits.
I'm not looking for credits. I'm looking for help with this.
What is that?
Ooh, I know what that is. That's a chicken droid, a BD unit. What happened to it?
Yeah, it looks more like a pile of parts than a droid.
Unfortunately, it is at this point. The cost of crossing the First Order.
What a bunch of bullies.
But that's where you come in.
Look, pal, we don't know the first thing about fixing droids.
And I don't expect you to. What I do ask is that you take this droid to Mubo's droid depot so we can repair the unit. There's information on this droid's database that's extremely valuable for a very specific group of people on this planet.
Why don't you just take it to Mubo yourself?
Let's just say Mubo and I don't have the best working relationship. But if you two deliver my BD unit, you won't think twice about repairing my little friend. Look, I know you don't know me, but I know people who know you, and they seem to think you can be trusted. I need to know I can count on you to help me in this matter.
Not to sound selfish, but what's in it for us?
The information housed on that droid can directly help you safely get off this planet. Now, will you help me?
What do you think, Al?
Well, I think we got no other choice. Come on, Freddy. We got a droid to fix.
And I thank you both. I wish I could tell you the impact of your choices this evening, but I don't want to jeopardize your safety.
Yeah. You just be sure to be here when we get back, okay?
You have my word.
Let's go, Freddy.
Off to Mubo's.
May the Force be with you.